Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining me for Point of View today. We have a packed show, and we're going to talk about the chaotic world we live in. That will be some of today's program. Will be used to focus on that issue. Later, we're going to talk about religious liberty in the Middle East, which is part of the chaos. Lots of chaos going on there. We're going to focus in on the Sudan and also the freeing of Meriam Ibrahim. We've talked about that. And Travis Weber from Family Research Council will join us to discuss it. FRC was instrumental in making that happen. And then we'll also discuss Iraq. Kirby's commentary today is on Mosul, the second largest city in the country, where in 2003 there were 60,000 Christians. Today there are 0. His commentary focuses on that, and we'll discuss it a little bit later. But first I want to talk a little bit about Israel, because I think the whole world has been focusing on that part of the world. And the latest ceasefire is a 7-hour humanitarian one. We're hearing rumblings now that some of the Israeli forces are moving to the outskirts of Gaza because the leadership actually feels that some of their goals have been accomplished. And certainly we've also discussed the tunnels there. Some of the kibbutz in Israel are becoming ghost towns. Others are protected by IDF forces. And they're used to the sirens and the bombs, but this tunnel threat is brand new, with terrorists in there popping out. Kind of scary, and something that the Israelis want to deal with and really do need to deal with. And I want to point you, ladies and gentlemen, to a video that's been kind of going around the internet of a young woman. She's 27 years old. She lives in Israel with her family on a kibbutz. And she wants the world to understand what it's like for the Israelis there. So let's go to just a clip of that. The rest of it you can actually see if you go to pointofview.net. You can see the whole thing. It's about 9 minutes. But let's hear just a tiny part of it.
Up until now, our main threat was the Qassam bombs. And somehow we got used to it. We would just go upon our daily routine. When you guys don't hear about us on the news, it doesn't mean the Qassams aren't falling. We have days in which we have 9, 10 Qassams, and even sometimes the Israeli news doesn't speak about it because it's not enough, or nothing happened to anyone. I think it's a matter of luck. I think every single bomb that falls should be spoken about in Israel, of course, but also overseas. But I understand that there's lots of important things going on. Anyway, we can deal with the Qassam bombs. We have safety rooms. What I'm afraid of is the method that they've been working on for a few years, and now it's been starting to, they start to use it now, which is the tunnels. A few tunnels were found in the southern area of Israel. And this morning I woke up from a Teva Adom alarm, and I went to the safety room. I met my family there, and after it fell, my father told me that they found a tunnel outside our kibbutz. They killed 9 or 10 Hamas terrorists that were already out of the tunnel. It's a space, I can see it from here, it's a space outside of our kibbutz where we go for picnics and stuff. during February and March, there's these beautiful flowers there, so people come from all over Israel, and they just came out of this hole and started walking around, and thank God the IDF saw them, and they took care of the problem. But they have found a way into our homes now. And that is scary, because now I can't walk around in the kibbutz and just know, okay, where the closest shelter is, and just be aware and awake, because now they're just digging their way up from Gaza into our country. And it's a whole new threat, and it's a very scary threat to walk around your own home and be afraid.
Ladies and gentlemen, when you read the media, most of the mainstream outlets here in this country, you see, it's a decided favoring of the Hamas side of things. I know that Israel's side is reported. I know that our administration says Israel should be able to defend itself, but we also have our Secretary of State constantly going over there, constantly getting other Arab nations to put pressure on Israel to stop targeting certain areas within the Gaza Strip, to stop defending itself from the rockets that have been coming in well before they started defending themselves. And now this new threat that's out there, which is these tunnels that have been built with cement that's come across the border into Gaza. They're building this network of tunnels. Israel has found about 30 of them. And in those tunnels, terrorists will go through and come up into the country of Israel proper, and wreak havoc. Also, they can pull people in, prisoners. One was pulled in last week. We don't know what happened to that person. And so Israel is trying to dismantle the tunnels. There was a big fight about the cement, supposed to be innocuous for building materials, going in to Gaza, and now we know what that cement was for. This was in recent years. They've been built and they need to be destroyed. Otherwise, people like this young woman who lives on a kibbutz, who's trying to just go about life with her family, they've already learned how to deal with the Qassam rockets coming into their country. They have alarms, sirens, bomb shelters, and they have the Iron Dome to defend themselves. So even though that's not fun, and you could visibly see when there was a plane flying over, that she would get a little bit shaken, and maybe a tear would come into her eye. So you know that even though they say that they're dealing with it, it's still difficult. But this threat with the tunnels is unacceptable. And so when you think about and read a news report about Israel and about Israel being called an occupier of Palestinian land, think about her and think about the idea of living in a country when people can come up out of a hole on your property and start doing damage. Again, go to pointofview.net to see the 9-minute video. I think it's something that will affect you, and it will help you, I think more than anything else, understand why Israel has to defend itself, why any country would never allow those things to be foisted on it, rockets, terrorists coming through tunnels, and why our country needs to stop pressuring them to stop fighting, to cease their fighting back. Israel needs to get itself in a position where it's safe, where its citizens are safe. That's what they pretty much have to focus a lot of their time and money on. And our country should be standing with them, not against them. Ladies and gentlemen, also on pointofview.net, you can see an op-ed by Senator Ted Cruz. It's from the Washington Times from last week, and it has to do with the tale of two hospitals. It also paints a picture of the situation there. We may discuss it a little bit later in the program, but nonetheless, go on to the website and check it out and read it for yourself. I think we Americans need to have an understanding of the situation there and how it's affecting these people. Next up, we're going to answer the question, does every state need to have an abortion clinic, according to Roe versus Wade? We'll talk about it right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kirby Anderson.
Over the last few decades, I have followed the philosophical twists and turns of the environmental movement. As a student, I participated in the first Earth Day back in 1970 by inviting a Sierra Club leader to speak to my high school. I've also noticed how environmentalism almost became a religion. The philosophy of pantheism began to gain more prominence in the movement, and Earth worship almost became a foundational tenet of environmentalism. I've also noticed an increasing condemnation of the free market within the environmental movement, and there was always the belief that the only solution to many of our environmental problems was a global government. Nevertheless, I was always uncomfortable when a speaker at a political event or a guest on my radio program would link environmentalism to communism. You've probably heard the line, the environmental movement is like a watermelon, green on the outside, red on the inside. But you know, the latest environmental declaration makes me think that those observations weren't too far off target. Environmental activists from 130 different environmental groups call for an end to capitalism and the free market system. The Margarita Declaration, which was drafted in Venezuela, declares that global warming cannot be stopped without ending the capitalist system. You know, actually, a free market and private property are important tools in dealing with most forms of pollution. You know, if you own your land, you're likely to take care of it. If everyone owns the land, like in socialism, often nobody takes care of it. Professor Garrett Harding called this the tragedy of the commons. You could also call it the tragedy of the public restroom. Think of a mess in a typical public restroom. Now compare that to the bathroom in your home. When something is held in common, no one feels the same responsibility as when they own it themselves. So, you know, we may have environmental problems to address in our world, but ending capitalism and the free market is not the way to solve them. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. And, of course, Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court decision regarding abortion, was decided 41 years ago. And ever since then, there's been a pro-life movement. And in a lot of states, restrictions on abortion have been passed. Things like parental notification, parental consent. And now, one of the latest waves of legislation has been the idea of restricting abortion clinics, getting them to sort of up to par, to have perhaps their abortionists, the doctors working there, having admitting privileges at local hospitals in order to protect women who might have a complication. Other laws, in fact, in Texas, they're discussing this right now in a court, requiring these clinics to have sort of the same standards as other ambulatory medical facilities. So that's another common sense regulation just to make it safer for women. I mean, we're looking at Kermit Gosnell and his clinic, and we don't want repeats of that. So that's the type of thing that's happening, and it's just a very interesting decision, a couple of decisions that have happened with regard to this. At an appeals court, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans, in Texas, we passed a law about a year ago that did just what I just described. It required that abortionists have admitting privileges at local hospitals. It's actually resulted in the closure of half of the abortion clinics in Texas. And it was upheld at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals a few months ago. Well, there's another decision from the Fifth Circuit, just a 3-judge panel there that came down last week about Mississippi. And in Mississippi, it's a little different. They said, yes, the law is pretty much the same as the Texas law, but we're not going to strike it down, because if we do, there won't be any abortion clinics in Texas. That's the ruling. And with me to discuss that ruling, which is very disturbing to me, is Anna Franzonello. She's with Americans United for Life, and she's joined us before on Point of View. She's been at AUL since 2009, and she graduated from Franciscan University in 2003, and then she went to Notre Dame Law School. She was president of the Federalist Society, and she majors on several issues at AUL: freedom of conscience, at Planned Parenthood investigations. She's spearheaded a lot of that, and also emergency contraception and pregnancy care centers. So all very worthy endeavors. Anna, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Anna, let's talk a little bit about these two decisions at the Fifth Circuit. One by about Texas's law, which upheld it, and one about Mississippi's law. What's the difference?
Well, the difference is probably the judges, because the laws themselves, as the court, the panel that looked at the Mississippi law, said they're virtually identical. So the panel that looked at the Mississippi law, had to find a way to strike it down. Obviously they're looking to strike it down. They wanted to distinguish it from the Texas law. The problem is they're identical, and the reasons for these laws, to protect women's health and safety, are the same reasons. The court admits that. They said, the reasons for the Mississippi law, every single one that the Fifth Circuit already identified about the Texas one are the same, and those reasons are important. The admitting privileges, requiring that a doctor have admitting privileges at a local hospital, it provides a more thorough evaluation of physician competency. It ensures that we have competent physicians performing these abortions. It acknowledges the continuity of care for a woman undergoing an abortion if there's complications. It optimizes that patient information transfer and complication management. So after an abortion, which we know is a procedure that can have a lot of complications, it ensures that that patient information is transferred, that there's a timely complication management, and it really important interest that it prevents patient abandonment by these abortionists.
Which is often the case in some of the deaths that we're seeing in these patients. My guest is Anna Franzonello from Americans United for Life. We're talking about a decision by the Fifth Circuit and then another decision by a Fifth Circuit panel that seems contradictory. But Anna, when you look at it, this is what scares me about it. Because it seems to me that they're saying that Roe versus Wade requires that every state have an abortion clinic.
Right. And that's ultimately the outcome of, what the court is looking at the Mississippi law. What they try to distinguish is, though there's still some abortion providers in Texas, and this is the only Mississippi abortion clinic, they had to get around the fact that, already before this law, 60% of Mississippi women who were seeking abortions went out of the state already. There is abortion availability within a driving distance, even if you close that Mississippi clinic. But you can see that the court really wanted to keep this one particular clinic open. This decision is beneficial to that clinic, but not for the women of Mississippi, who in large part already were going outside of the state if they sought an abortion and could still do that. But this idea that, an abortion clinic has to exist within every state runs counter to a lot of other Supreme Court precedent that we have. So in Russ versus Sullivan and cases dealing with funding the abortion industry, we already have the Supreme Court saying a state does not have to commit any resources to abortion, that a state doesn't have to facilitate abortion. But the panel of reviewing the Mississippi admitting privileges law basically says the opposite of what the Supreme Court has said all along, insisting that there be an abortion clinic within each state.
Well, so what this does is it goes counter to the idea that state after state is now, Anna, trying to make abortion at least a little bit safer. If you're going to have it, at least let's protect the women. And so so they're doing this. They're passing these laws. And then this law, if this stands, if the Fifth Circuit decision stands, then it will require that a substandard clinic remain open, because we've already determined that the one clinic in Mississippi is substandard and wouldn't pass muster there. So in a sense, it totally guts the purpose of these laws, which is to make the clinic safer. Correct?
Right. And that's even the panel, the majority in the panel recognizes that its decision is pretty dangerous. And so it tries to put in this caveat. They have this language that said, nothing in this opinion should be read to hold that any law or regulation that would close this clinic would inevitably fail with the undue burden standard of Planned Parenthood versus Casey. But the problem is there's no logical backstop for that. There's nothing in its opinion that supports this caveat that it tries to put out, because the only thing that the court looked at is that this one clinic in Mississippi, is failing to comply with getting admitting privileges at local hospitals. And the dissent in the case is it's a fantastic read. If anyone, is looking into this case more, I would suggest reading Judge Carnes' dissent, because again, this was a 2-1 decision. There was one judge on this three-judge panel that dissented, and he draws out some just really great points, criticizing the majority on this. And he says, exactly that the majority can't have it both ways. As long as they're trying to say this undue burden analysis, we can't look at access outside of Mississippi, only within Mississippi. The closure of that clinic for any of its violations would be considered an undue burden, and so it allows this unregulated, unruled clinic practice especially in areas where clinics are scarce.
Ladies and gentlemen, Anna's article that appears on National Review, we've also posted it at pointofview.net. It's entitled "The Dangerous Implication in the Fifth Circuit Abortion Ruling." It's very good, and it explains this. And we're going to continue to talk about this. We'd love to hear from you on this issue also. Our number is 800-351-1212. And the question on the table is, should we ensure that every state in the United States of America has an abortion clinic? I mean, after all, we had Roe versus Wade, a decision. It required us to allow abortions, whether the state would vote against it or not. We have a lot of pro-life states in this country. We have a lot of states where they're now restricting abortions. Some of the states are big, like Texas, and so you're going to have abortion clinics in Texas, even though you have a pretty pro-life majority here. In Mississippi, not the case. It didn't have that many abortion clinics, and all the ones it has have been substandard. There are other states that are in a similar situation, and so this ruling is important. Anna, what do you think will happen? Do you think that it will be appealed to the full Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals? Do you think this will go to the Supreme Court?
Well, I mean, and that's those are both possibilities. So we see that admitting privileges laws are being challenged everywhere that they've been enacted. So like you mentioned, the Texas case, we already have a Fifth Circuit decision upholding that case. There was a district court opinion out of Alabama today striking down the Alabama admitting privileges law. This is litigation that will be going forward. It's very probable, if we see a circuit split, ultimately that this can go up to the Supreme Court. And I think, this, like you said, this decision on the Mississippi law is particularly pernicious in that it's saying that, it basically is saying that you can have these perpetually unregulated clinics. It's enabling the next Kermit Gause now when, we see that abortion providers are scarce, that a state can't do anything to protect women against dangerous providers. So I think this is something that the Supreme Court may be interested in taking up if we do ultimately get a circuit split on this.
Let's talk about it, ladies and gentlemen. Our number is 800-351-1212. It would be kind of funny if there was a circuit split in the same circuit. I don't know if that can happen or not. We'll ask Anna after the break. But again, join us and answer the question or weigh in on the question. Does every state need to have an abortion clinic in America just because of the way our laws are right now? We'd love to hear from you on that. We've already got a couple calls we'll take after the break. We'll continue our discussion with Anza Franzonello from Americans United for Life, a great organization that is going step by step to restrict abortions. We really appreciate them. We'll talk about it more right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. My guest is Anna Franzonello. She is with Americans United for Life, and among her duties there, she consults with state and federal legislators, and she's provided testimony in favor of life-affirming legislation. And I mean, AUL is behind a lot of the life-affirming legislation that's passed across the country in various states. Anna is also a contributing author to AUL's publication Defending Life and a co-author of their Constitutional Law and Abortion Primer for law school students. and contributed to AAUL's 2011 report, The Case for Investigating Planned Parenthood, and they're doing that now, which is good. But Anna, thank you so much for being with us today. We've got some calls waiting, and I'm going to go to one in a minute, but I want to bring up one more part of this this Texas law that passed about a year ago. And really, there's actually a trial today, beginning today, where this part is being challenged. And as you know, this is the part that requires the abortion clinic to meet standards that an ambulatory hospital surgery center would. I mean, I think of this is where people go to get colonoscopies and get their polyps removed. So, you know, having an abortion would seem to be just as dangerous, if not more dangerous than that. So tell us about that. And also just, again, what do you foresee as far as the courts on that?
I mean, I think that the ambulatory surgical center should be upheld as well. Like you mentioned, other procedures, similar procedures are done there with those standards. For a long time now, we've had abortion providers running unregulated practices, and we see the need. 41 years ago, the court in Roe versus Wade basically constitutionalized abortion, didn't just legalize it, but constitutionalized it. And since then, we have example after example of botched abortions or reasons that we need more health and safety standards to protect women. But at the same time, we have the abortion industry fighting against any type of regulation, anything that would potentially increase its overhead, require it to put its profits back into its practice to protect women. So we see that they're going to challenge all of these health and safety standards because it impacts their bottom line. The abortion profiteering business has existed since the beginning of Roe. And I think it's interesting, too, to look at Roe versus Wade itself, for all of its extremism and flaws. It identified maternal health as an important reason to regulate abortion. It talked about abortion mills as being problematic, even at that time, and the need for regulating them. And the court in Roe, and I just want to read one short quote, it said that this maternal health interest obviously extends to at least the performing physician and his, to regulating the performing physician and his staff, to the facilities involved, and to the availability of aftercare and to adequate provision for any complication or emergency that may arise. So the court in Roe versus Wade even imagined admitting privileges would be staff privileges, that these would be important interests for a state to enact laws about. And we see, 41 years later, the abortion industry is still challenging, any kind of regulation of itself.
Let's take a call from the state of Louisiana. Ricky is listening in there on KPAE. Hi, Ricky. You're on Point of View.
Oh, thank you, Ben. I appreciate you having me there. Yes, two comments. One on the standards of sanitary conditions in the slaughterhouses of the human beings. They should be at least on par with the slaughterhouses for animals. Like, they slaughter hogs and cows. They got to meet very sanitary conditions or they'll get closed down by the Department of Agriculture. I think the slaughter of human beings should at least be on par with the standard of sanitation of slaughtering animals. And then number two, the Fifth Circuit Court, I believe if it goes to the Supreme, they're going to say, look, you voted one way for the same identical standards, but yet you voted a different way only because they only had one abortion. That shows that it's partial, and they're carrying out and passing laws, so they're going to be overturned. Just common sense will tell you that. That's not going to hold because they voted, the same exact way for one. They voted, different way only because they only had one slaughterhouse in Mississippi.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Thank you, Ricky. I appreciate your call. And, one columnist, Anna, called it a schizoid court. Can a court, that was what I brought up before the break. Can a court have two rulings that are conflicting like that? Ultimately, if you have the full panel looking at it? Yeah,
the panel is the panel's at least pretending that or trying to say that it's still complying with what the Fifth Circuit already ruled, and they're attempting to distinguish the situation in Mississippi from Texas. So they are admitting the things that they have to admit, that the Fifth Circuit already said there's a rational basis for this law, and they admit that. They admit that there are reasonable health and safety justifications for the Mississippi legislature to have enacted this law. But what they're trying to do is say, oh, but even under what the Fifth Circuit has already said. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think it should hold. I think this is terrible reasoning. Even, the article I wrote, the case that they rely on is so bizarre. It has nothing to do. And even the panel itself basically admits the case that they're relying on, this racial discrimination case from the 1930s, is nothing like this case. It's not a due process case. It's an equal protection case, whatever. So I think that the reasoning is so bad in this case, it should be overturned if it's appealed en banc to the Fifth Circuit or above. But I think, if the Fifth Circuit, that there won't be a circuit split within the Fifth Circuit itself. But we do have admitting privilege cases going forward in other circuits as well. So that's where you might see a circuit split.
Well, what scares me though here, and I'm not a lawyer, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like there is a danger that you could enshrine a right to have an abortion clinic in your state for every woman. So that would mean that anytime, even if you had a bad clinic like Mississippi, it would have to remain open. And it just kind of worries me that there could be that, that could move up the system and be upheld.
Right. And that is what's very concerning about the reasoning in this, is that it effectively says that, there has to be abortion access within this state. And that's nothing that the Supreme Court has ever held before. And I could point out in the abortion funding line of cases, we see the Supreme Court saying the opposite, that a state would never have to commit resources to abortion. So I think, this novel concept that there has to be abortion clinics within each and every state is not something that the Supreme Court has ever held, and I think it does run directly contrary to other case law. So I'm optimistic that it won't stand at the end of the day.
Well, that's good. 800-351-1212 if you'd like to weigh in on this. Do you think that we need to have an abortion clinic in every state? Do you think that would be at least fair to abortion-minded women? And I want to play the devil's advocate a little bit on these two provisions that are protecting women and that are requiring at least some standards on the part of these abortion clinics. But the argument that Planned Parenthood and everybody makes is that poor women, this disproportionately hurts them because they can't afford to travel so far to get their abortion, and so it's harder on them. What about that argument?
Well, the idea that we should let the poor be subjected to substandard clinics instead of travel is really, that's a terrible philosophy to have towards the poor. Or the idea that our solution for poor women, which often when they talk about, the reasons that poor women need abortions, it's because, they're presenting this as society's solution for poor women, that we should kill their children instead of providing them real help. And I think that the poor deserve better than that philosophy, that, we leave substandard clinics in their communities, and that we see the answer to their poverty is killing their children. So I think that it's just it's a terrible philosophy towards the situation that poor women are in.
Okay, folks, I'm just going to leave that one right there. I do want to ask you one more question, though, Anna, and that's about Planned Parenthood, because there are reports coming out now, and I think this has to do with a lot of AUL's work, that Planned Parenthood is billing the government fraudulently, overbilling patients, and that, we're finding out things about them. Thank you, guys, for all your hard work in making this happen, but I want to ask you, isn't their abortion lobby so strong that it almost doesn't matter that we're finding these things out?
Well, I would just say, when we talk about Planned Parenthood misdeeds, there's an expression, I think, it's hard to do evil ethically. And I think we see that, it's not just the overbilling. And there's a lot of other, failure to report rape and those kind of things as well, statutory rape. And abuse of women. And we even see substandard clinics within Planned Parenthood itself. This isn't, this idea that Planned Parenthood clinics are safe and that these are, the opposite of the Kermit Gosnell situation is not true. We have, just from Delaware recently, 2 nurses who left a Planned Parenthood clinic, not because they had this change of heart on abortion, but because of what they call meat market style abortion.
Hey, I got to jump in, Anna, because we're about on a break.
Oh, yes, sorry.
But can you stick with me a few more minutes?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, good. We'll hold you over the break. We'll be right back for more of Point of View. Give us a call if you'd like to weigh in, 800-351-1212. We'll be right back with more.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Thanks for listening. I'm Penna Dexter. Anna Franzonello is my guest, and she's with Americans United for Life. My thanks to her for staying with me because she brought up something I couldn't let it go, talking about women leaving abortion clinics. And Anna, these are abortion-minded women because it's so filthy there.
Yeah, so in Delaware, and they actually left the clinic in 2012, but they testified before the Delaware Senate in 2013, two nurses from a Planned Parenthood abortion clinic, they characterize what they saw there as meat market style abortions, and they talk about, and there's just a whole host of health and safety violations, just really shocking stuff that the abortionist did there. And these women complained up the chain in Planned Parenthood and also to state health departments. And they were, one nurse was told that she couldn't be the one to complain, that patients had to complain. And what she said, and this is, these are abortion-minded women, like you said, and this is confirmed by other abortion advocates as well. When we talk about, substandard clinic conditions, many state health departments require that the patients be the one to report them, but a lot of the patients, don't because, either, they're poor, they don't have time, they don't have the means and resources to find out where they're supposed to be reporting this, or there's also the stigma of abortion where they don't necessarily want to become the voice and the face for the movement to go after these abortion providers who have abused them, who have, caused them injury. So there's a whole host of problems with this. We started talking about this in that, this concept that Planned Parenthood is the good abortion provider that is, in contrast to someone like Kermit Gosnell, is a myth. There are Planned Parenthood clinics.
Is that what Planned Parenthood's trying to do? Are they trying to kind of polish their image in contrasting themselves to Kermit Gosnell?
I think so. I mean, you do see that with the very little comments that they made at the time that, when Kermit Gosnell's story was finally getting some national media attention after, the pro-life community spoke out about the blackout, and there started to be some national attention given to the story. Planned Parenthood did make a comment after his conviction where they talk about, this is basically, I forget the words exactly that they use. You could go back and look it up. But they make a comment about no more women would be victimized by Gosnell. So basically putting themselves out there as in contrast to Gosnell, that he victimized women. But the sad fact is that women are victimized in Planned Parenthood clinics each and every day. And, obviously, Planned Parenthood didn't include any mention of the babies that, Kermit Gosnell was convicted for killing. I find it hard to believe that they really have a problem with the fact that he inverted their usual process of, they kill the baby in the womb and then extract it, whereas he was extracting babies and then killing them. But they did criticize, or at least say, no more women would be victimized by Gosnell. But, as you mentioned, AUL has documented, and other organizations have as well, these abuses by Planned Parenthood, not just these other abortion providers or this, Kermit Gosnell is they always want to call him an aberration, but he's not. Over 100 abortion providers have been, investigated or cited for problems in 29 states since 2009. So in the last 5 years, we do have a number of states looking into abortion providers. But from what we know about the, lack of reporting, or that women, aren't necessarily wanting to put themselves out there, to be the one to go up against big abortion, we know that this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Well, we're glad you're out there fighting. Ladies and gentlemen, you can go to pointofview.net and click through to Americans United for Life. I'm sure you can get a hold of their report and all their publications. You can see more about Anna and everyone else there and their work. Anna, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll continue to take your calls at 800-351-1212. Let's go to Arkansas and speak with JT. Hi, JT. Thanks for calling in.
Hey, I just wanted to say how it's terrible what the nation, what they're doing, even with abortion. To me, it's like taking a gun and just shooting people. To me, it's basically murder.
Yeah, and we can see it now because we have the sonogram technology, so we can see into the womb. Not that we didn't know it was a human life, but it's so clear now. It's a picture. So thank you so much for pointing that out, JT. We appreciate it. Let's go to Will in South Carolina. Hi, Will.
Thank you for taking my call, Penna. My thinking is, I've got a double question. These judges that are in these appeal courts, now they are appointed by the president, aren't they?
These are, yes, they're federal judges appointed by the president. I don't know.
That's
I don't know what the I should have asked Anna who appointed these three on this 3-judge panel. But yes, that's who they're appointed by. They're federal judges.
Okay. Well, my second question to that is that he was the president of these people, but the big thing is I just can't see a judge or any man want his wife or daughter or granddaughter to go to an unregulated clinic to have a DNC. So why would they want to not regulate where they're doing abortions? I mean, you're going in the same place, doing the same area. It just boggles the mind.
Yeah, I know what you're feeling there. I think, they are they're acting out of, I think most of them, pro-abortion convictions or their reading of the law, and that's what scares me, that they're reading the law to say, or the Roe versus Wade decision to say that it's an undue burden for a woman to live in a state that doesn't have an abortion clinic and need an abortion. And, Anna says she doesn't think it will hold or stand, and I hope she's right. I really hope she's right. But thank you, Will, for your call. We appreciate it.
Thank you, ma'am. Bye-bye.
Okay, let's go to Mary in South Carolina. Hi, Mary. Thanks for calling in.
Hi. Can't usually get through. You have so many calls, so I'm surprised.
You have a lot of calls. I'm trying to get through them because I want everybody to be able to weigh in.
Right. Well, this is all these comments are a long time coming. Number one is, if the government is so hipped on birth control pills, why do we need abortion? They give them out freely. I know there are clinics that give them out freely. That's the first thing. The second thing is, 50 years ago, none of this was available. So why do we need abortion clinics? And today, when patients require so much as far as, like you say, cleanliness and all these federal requirements that are on small businesses, why aren't there federal requirements on abortion clinics? It's like it just doesn't all balance out equally. Thanks for being there.
Thank you. Well, apparently this is a state issue. Every state gets to regulate abortion the way they want to, and that's why we at Point of View are constantly informing you about the different efforts in various states to make abortion rare, to regulate abortion, to make it safer if it's going to happen. Right. And so it's a state issue.
But mind you, it might be safer for the mother. The outcome for the children are the same.
Right, absolutely. You are right. And
the
question that Mary asked,
so where is the women's movement? Half of them are girls.
Yeah.
So it's like, the population, they're worrying about the aging population. So all these outside issues are never brought in to the abortion discussion.
You're making just too much common sense. I will say that one method that was used 50 years ago, Mary mentioned 50 years ago, to stop babies from being born out of wedlock was abstinence. People just refrained from having sex outside of marriage. Not everyone. Some people did. But now it's encouraged. Now you can't even say in many circumstances that is wrong or that shouldn't be done. Instead, you have to provide the contraception. And when you do provide contraception, you actually encourage more extramarital sex, and you end up with pregnancies because it doesn't always work or it's not always used correctly. So that's why this is happening. It's why it's a problem. And, we just can't bring ourselves to make a moral judgment on God's plan for a man and a woman to be married before they begin all this activity. So it's too bad. We've gone far away from God's plan, and we're having to deal with the consequences. Well, ladies and gentlemen, go to pointofview.net. Again, you will be able to find these articles we've been talking about. We're going to get back to the subject of Israel for a little while, and you can call in on that in the next segment, 800-351-1212. We'll do a little bit of talking about Ted Cruz's story of 2 hospitals. But please take advantage of the donate button right in the middle of the Point of View website. We are in the summer doldrums, and we would appreciate your help as much as you can do. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Across the nation, this is Point of View. For materials offered during the broadcast, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Ladies and gentlemen, Christians in America are really celebrating, because we've been talking about this so long, the end of 27-year-old mother of two Meriam Ibrahim's ordeal. She is a young Sudanese physician. She's married to a Christian. She was threatened with death by hanging for supposedly converting from Islam and put in prison along with her toddler son. And she gave birth to her second child in a Sudanese prison. And, of course, we were all praying for her. And there were people working hard on her behalf, certain members of the U.S. House and Senate, but no one working harder than the Family Research Council. And with us to talk about that hard work and what transpired is Travis Weber, and he's director of the Center for Religious Liberty at the Family Research Council. He is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and also Regent University School of Law. And he focuses on all kinds of legal and policy issues pertaining to religious freedom. Travis, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Tell me what happened. I know that I was watching Fox News when Megyn Kelly talked about how when Meriam was released, saying that there was a lot of credit due to Family Research Council. Tell us what happened.
Sure. Well, thankfully, Meriam was released and was freed from basically continued prosecution at the direction of the Sudanese government, and then left the country, went to Italy, and has now arrived in the United States. We're thankful that she is out of harm's way and out of the grip of, these very draconian laws under which she was convicted, and also is free from the threat of persecution at the hands of her countrymen who may not be happy with, with her actions. But, so for those reasons, we're thankful that she's safe here in the United States and able to embark on a new phase of her life. And we had from the start noticed that this obviously is a serious problem when someone is sentenced to death for their religious choices. Unfortunately, it happens all too often around the world. This was a rather notable case, and we felt that it was important to bring attention to it.
Well, Travis, it is notable, and I think the reason for it, and the reason that I was glad to see FRC get involved, is because I know that you all you major on religious liberty in America, and it's being attacked from every front in our country and inside. And sometimes we get this criticism that, well, it's nothing. The persecution that Christians get in America is nothing compared to what you see overseas. So, okay, well, if we've got religious persecution everywhere, so let's focus on it everywhere. And so, to your credit, FRC did work with members of Congress on this. And, am I right? Am I reading this right, that the idea is that, well, if we're going to fight for religious liberty here, we should be fighting for it other places too?
That's absolutely a correct view. And religious liberty, it's the freedom to choose what one believes as it regards religion and faith and worship of God. And this is this faith and this way of living one's life affects the choices and the actions in all spheres of one's life, including work, life, and other areas of one's life. So we hold to this view of religious liberty. We believe it must be upheld at home, but it also must be upheld overseas. As you point out, yes, in some places in the world, people are being persecuted for even choosing their beliefs and choosing how they worship. Thankfully, we're not at that point in the United States, but the way you approach freedom and religious liberty and the freedom to choose one's religious beliefs is, it's one continual scale and one unified view. It's just a matter of degree when we look at what's happening in many places overseas compared to the U.S. Thankfully, we're not there, but it is important to remember that the view of religion and how people approach religion, their freedom to do that. This is the same freedom of religion, that we're talking about when we discuss domestic issues that we discuss when we refer to situations overseas.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to join our conversation, the number is 800-351-1212. Travis Weber from Family Research Council is my guest. And Travis, last Friday, I had in studio, often we have Kelly Shackelford in on Fridays because he's here in Dallas, and he does such a wonderful job talking about religious liberty, and so he'll come in and co-host with us. And he brought in Paul Diamond, who is a religious liberty attorney in the United Kingdom. And Paul said, he's very disturbed when he sees us losing our religious freedoms in the United States because it's worse in the UK. And they want to have a country where they can look at, thriving religious liberty, and they're less and less seeing it here. So we're fighting all these battles here. We're just a little bit behind the UK. And so, I asked him if the tip of the spear was not, as begin to see here, the homosexual issue, where it's being used as sort of a special rights, civil rights type of club to force businesses to comply with something that's against their conscience. And so do you see it that way? Do you see that issue is being used and really abused here in this country?
Absolutely. And, we need to take heed of what's occurring in places around the world. It is true that many other generally free democratic nations in Europe, and we can look to Canada also, they are in a worse spot than we are. And this is in large part due to their different views on freedom of speech and free exercise of religion. Thankfully, for all the problems we have, we still generally have a rather robust and strong protection of freedom of speech and free exercise of religion. Both are protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution, a federal constitutional right. And that individual protection for people to live their lives freely, as it's upheld by the courts and remains strong, it allows our country to remain relatively free, as opposed to places which don't have that protection. So it's important to take heed of what's going on overseas and really remember that we need to fight for it at home, because the freedom to exercise a religion, our beliefs, and act on those beliefs at home affects the degree to which we can, which we are free to convey those views overseas and promote these views around the world. As I said before, this is one continuous issue. This is not a separate issue domestically and internationally. It's to be fair. Many people internationally are facing rather much more difficult persecution, far more difficult persecution than we are currently at home, but it's the same right that's ultimately being affected.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd love to see you join our conversation. We've got some folks calling in now, and after the break, we'll begin to take those calls, 800-351-1212. I'm also going to ask Travis about, President Obama's already started the ball rolling on this, but the whole idea of the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, because yes, we're not really facing threats to our lives here in this country, but we are facing threats to our livelihoods. Not only with things like the HHS mandate, which was upheld for small, closely held businesses by the Hobby Lobby case, but there's still threats there, as we discuss often here on Point of View. And then this whole idea of workplace rules coming out of the federal government for federal contractors, but also just for all businesses. That's a threat. It's been pushed for 2 decades. And could it pass? We're going to ask Travis Weber from Family Research Council that and other questions, and we'll take your calls. Again, the number is 800-351-1212. This is Point of View, and we'll be right back.
The Point of View Commentary with Kirby Anderson.
The purging of Christians from countries in the Middle East has been taking place for years, but the latest Christian purge from Mosul is the most disturbing. Christians are given the choice of converting to Islam or fleeing. Any who remain would face certain death from ISIS. Thousands have left the city with nothing more than the clothes that they are wearing. A recent Wall Street Journal editorial asks a good question. Imagine if a fundamentalist Christian sect captured a French city and began a systematic purge of Muslims. Their mosques were destroyed, their crescents defaced, the Quran burned, and then all Muslims forced to flee or face execution. Such an event would be unthinkable today, and if it did occur, Pope Francis and all other Christian leaders would denounce it and support efforts by government to stop it. The point they're making is the lack of concern from the Muslim world about what is happening right now in Iraq. To that, I might add my disappointment at the lack of comment even from so many in the West. Let me immediately give high praise to such spokesmen as Representative Frank Wolf. He's been on my radio program a number of times and has spoken forcefully about the plight of Christians in Middle Eastern countries where radicals dominate the political landscape. Sadly, he and a few others are the few voices speaking out about the purge of Christians in Muslim countries. The Christian purge by ISIS may be the most visible and most brutal, but there have been many other similar examples. Radical Muslims in Egypt have driven out the Coptic Christians from their homes. Radical Muslims in various parts of Africa have been killed and persecuted. This purging of Christians is reminiscent of the way that the Muslim army pursued the religious war against Jews and Christians in previous centuries. We should be hearing a loud outcry from Jews, Christians, and moderate Muslims about what is happening. I'm thankful for the few voices that speak out, but appalled that so very few do so. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
All of the family issues end up being religious liberty issues these days, and that's why it's important that groups like the Family Research Council have someone on staff and a great effort protecting religious liberty. That's why Travis Weber is there. He's the director of Center for Religious Liberty at the Family Research Council. He's my guest right now. Travis, tell us about ENDA, because we've talked at length on Point of View in recent days about President Obama's directive, his order that says all employers who do business with the federal government, with federal contractors, those contractors have to comply with this sort of elevation of homosexuality as some sort of a protected right. What about that for the non-contractors? Is that a threat also?
This executive order absolutely does threaten certain people. Because ENDA itself is not coming out of Congress. The president has decided to impose what he wants to do in this area of regarding the federal government by putting in place this executive order, which amends previous executive orders regarding federal contractors doing certain amounts of business with the federal government, and it adds in certain additional categories of protection that are nowhere in any federal statute passed by Congress regarding civil rights laws. So this goes above and beyond. It is basically an imposition of what he believes to be correct as it pertains to federal contractors. There is a small exemption for religious organizations, but this executive order will not protect entities and those seeking to live out their faith who do not fall within this small legal exemption. as it's defined in the law. And there will certainly be people who want to live out their faith and exercise their faith who are not protected by this exemption. The president basically has no regard for them and has seemingly ignored their request to be exempted from this imposition on their values.
And certainly if ENDA ever passes, and I know that it's come close at certain times, it just depends on the composition of Congress, is such a, who doesn't want to protect the employee from being discriminated against? I mean, we don't like that word discrimination, but we need to protect the rights of people to make decisions about what type of person they want to, represent them in public, right?
Well, absolutely. I mean, this is ultimately about freedom, and people miss that. In the rush to use the word discrimination and see how much we can use it above and beyond the next guy, we miss the point that, really deliberate debate on whether it's really the proper role of government to be mandating private transactions and telling people you can't do this, you must comply with my version of morality in your own private life. Certainly discrimination is a bad thing, but when you get into what we're dealing with here, it's a serious intrusion into private affairs and private business. But beyond that, most importantly, this is a direct suppression of the faith and views of many religious people around the United States. Basically, the people who are pushing these types of policies as embodied in the executive order and laws have no regard for those views, and they want to suppress those and think they have no place in our society. Basically telling the religious person and their views that they're to be sidelined and they're of no merit. And, that's really a problem when we're trying to live in a free democracy. I mean, you're dealing with constitutional rights like freedom of speech and freedom of religion, as we previously discussed. These things are subject to rather intricate legal balances, and it's not a simple matter of, okay, any type of discrimination bad, therefore let's pass this law and shove it down everyone's throat.
Now, here's something that is becoming a problem in European countries, and actually is rearing its head here, too. It has to do with Sharia law. Let's go to Glenn in North Carolina, listening in on WGN. Glenn, you're on with Travis Weber from FRC.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate y'all taking my call. The question I have is, I've worked all over Europe, Asia, and all with my job, and I've dealt with a lot of the Sharia law, and I know that how incompatible it really is with our form of government. But yet, because of our religious laws and what Khrushchev said 50 years ago, is how are we going to protect the Sharia law? Because there's areas in this country right now demanding that they be allowed to follow Sharia law because that's their religious right and freedom. And I'm driving, so I'm going to hang up, and I appreciate you responding. Have a good day.
Thank you for your call, Glenn. Travis, what about it?
Yeah, so this, I think, is an example of something that is not something that can be simply boiled down when you discuss it as a problem or not a problem or an issue or not an issue, right? It depends on what specifically we're talking about. Certainly the government cannot, under our current laws and the Constitution and interpretations of that Constitution and laws, the government cannot favor a certain religion. The government can't implement Sharia law here. That would be a direct violation of the Constitution. The government also cannot explicitly disfavor it. So we have this issue when we talk about Sharia law. And now when you come to the individual's practice of their religion, certainly our laws protect the individual's practice of their religion for a good reason. We've had a long history of the government in a variety of ways trying to interfere and suppress individual practice. So certainly Muslims are entitled to the same religious rights that the members of any other religion are in the United States when it comes to the Free Exercise Clause and Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And I think those laws are in place for good reason. That's not the same thing as saying, we're concerned about Sharia law as the government seeks to impose it. Entirely different issue, something that would not be permissible. And I'm just giving two very general frameworks and examples and ways of approaching this issue. Obviously, depending upon the specific scenario, factually and the legal considerations, the approach and analysis changes when you discuss the question of what about, Sharia law's compatibility with the United States and its democracy. But yes, overall, when you deal with the government imposing a certain religious framework, obviously, I mean, that would be a violation of the Constitution the principles were founded on.
I suppose you'd have to look at the particular law, but, it is true that there are areas in the country where they are almost Sharia zones, and where this, they sort of try to implement their own system in that area. And so that becomes an issue because we do want to protect religious liberty in the country, but sometimes some of their laws are a little bit contrary to ours. Let's go now to, oh my goodness, this ought to be an interesting call. Katie in Ohio. Katie, your point of view. Thanks for calling.
Now I'm nervous. I'm sorry.
Don't be nervous.
Thank you for taking me. I love listening to your program. I listen to it a lot. My question, and kind of a statement, mostly really a question, is you're talking about religious freedom. I assume that means all religious freedom. Of course, on the side Christianity. But back to the homosexual thing, it's mostly a Christian problem. But I am a homosexual Christian, and I want to know what the middle ground is between Christian freedom and our freedom so that we can respect each other and kind of work this out to where, if I go into a store or something, I can respect you, you can respect me back. And I guess that's my question is, where we go from there,
Before I let Travis give a response or a comment on this, folks can call in and make their own comments on it too, because I think Katie's respectfully called in, and so we can answer her. But Travis, just if you'd like to comment on her question, maybe we might want to clarify it a little bit too. If you'd like to, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I thank the caller for her call. And let me just point out something here. When we deal with these issues, oftentimes the line very quickly gets blurred from what the law should be doing or not doing into what people think is the proper way of treating someone else or how they should approach that person. I would wholeheartedly say with all my approaches to these issues and the way I approach them, would never disrespect someone. Would never, it's not motivated by hating that person, or my view of the law is not rooted in hate for someone. And I think it's very easy for people to say, oh, you have that legal position, therefore you want to disrespect or hate, right? So just to clarify that, that's the way I approach these things. But I hold positions as a matter of law because I believe they're best for the country and the people making up the country, and they're also accurate. Just generally, just very basically, approaching this question, I would say that, we have the First Amendment and freedom of religion contained in that amendment for a reason. And when laws infringe on that, that's a problem, and those laws can't be constitutionally permissible. So in the context of these various laws that are being passed for non-discrimination purposes, et cetera, they're very, and this is generally they're problematic because the large body of them infringe on the way people holding a sincere religious faith want to live that faith. Doesn't mean that there is to be disrespect in the relationship. There is just general, sincere differences of opinion. I think you can have those, and you can have a law which upholds religious freedom, even though people live differently and have different views on life.
Travis, thank you. Thank you for that. And also thank you just for joining me today on Point of View. We hope you'll come back sometime to talk about religious liberty. We're glad you're there at FRC, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Katie, you could stay on the line. I'd love to talk to you a little bit more. We've got a break right now. Ladies and gentlemen, go to pointofview.net and check out all our resources and the donate button. We'll be right back for more right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
As we often do, we are on the topic of religious liberty here on Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter, and Kirby Anderson is away, so I'm sitting in and enjoying doing so. And Katie's on the line. Katie called in from Ohio to talk with our guest who's left, Travis Weber from Family Research Council. We were talking about the ENDA laws that, President Obama's basically, he has implemented it for federal contractors. And that law, just to explain it, really basically says that employers cannot decline to hire or promote someone if they're doing so on the basis of the person's sexual orientation. Now, Katie's called in from Ohio. Katie says Katie is a homosexual, and she was just asking Travis to kind of talk about that. I wondered, Katie, if you were satisfied with the answer.
Not really. I kind of couldn't get a clear answer from that. I pretty much want to know how we respect religious freedom, all religions, and also not discriminate, because it's hard once you start working and you kind of have to hide who you are. You should be able to work with that person and both respect each other, but not be left out entirely because of your differences.
Yeah, like I really do think that we should respect people. I think Travis made that point too, that as Christians especially, we ought to be respecting people, and certainly as Americans with our constitutional rights, our inalienable rights that are enshrined in the Constitution. But then in the workplace, employers also have rights to hire who they would like to, and if it's if their religion informs that, then they should be able to have that. Now, if you want to call that discrimination, then I think they should have the right to discriminate, but I don't really call it discrimination. Have you experienced a problem in the workplace with regard to your sexual orientation?
I have, yes.
So, and so you think that you should not have to experience those problems?
No, I really don't. Because if we start doing that, then, if it goes against somebody's religion to, let's say, have a Muslim work for us or red hair, or, it can just kind of get out of hand from just being a homosexual. I don't think that your views or your morals would have any effect on how you work. I mean, it does, but I don't think you should be not allowed to work for a company because of what you believe in.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that people that make their sexual orientation apparent in the way they conduct themselves, then I think the employer has really, if they disagree with it, then they have that right. Now, you say you feel like you have to sort of keep yours under wraps in order to be secure in the workplace and things, but really, just wouldn't it be better if that was not a factor in your employment and that your job performance were the reason you're hired and fired and promoted and all of that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but what I think is happening out here is people are, and they put now the transgender component into it, which makes it very open. And so employers who perhaps you are a Christian and you have you have a restaurant, but you're a Christian owner and you would rather not have someone who's just very open about something that you believe is sinful working for you. I mean, I would think that a business owner would have that right.
Well, it's a hard thing to justify being transgendered as sinful. These people are born in the wrong bodies. They deserve as much compassion as we should give them as Christians, and I think we should give them a chance on how they are and how they work, and it shouldn't be about what they look like or not looking perfectly woman.
So that means like an employer should have to hire anyone even though they don't like how they look. Because, a lot of times, I mean, some establishments would object to the way a certain person perhaps dresses, perhaps the piercings or the tattoos or whatever. That's part of your decision on employing someone. It just is.
Well, of course, I completely agree on that, but your gender isn't really something that you can change, you know? I mean, if a transgender person walks in with a whole bunch of tattoos and whatnot, I mean, I can see that, but if somebody walks in who wants a job and, you know, willing to work, and I don't see how that would be something that there'd be a problem with. I don't know.
Well, you know, I'm sorry that you've experienced a problem, because you sound like a person that's probably not flamboyant about your sexual orientation. But I am just, I'm always going to fall down on the right of really the freedom of someone's First Amendment rights to conduct their business in a way that comports with their beliefs.
Of course.
And I think there are a lot of companies, in any way, most of the Fortune 500 companies have policies that I think you would probably appreciate.
Yeah. Yeah, I really do want to see everyone respected, our religious freedom as Christians and as homosexuals, our freedoms too, I guess.
Okay, well, you know, just let me say one more thing, Katie, before I let you go. I appreciate your demeanor in your phone call, and, you know, my prayer for you would be that you would consider the way that God created you, and consider, you know, what the scriptures say about homosexuality. That would just be my prayer for you. But I do want to say that I really appreciate the way you conducted yourself on the call. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate you talking to me.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to Point of View. And again, we are taking your calls, 800-351-1212. Let's go to Andrew in the state of Texas. Hi, Andrew. You're on Point of View.
Hey, how are you doing?
Great.
Good. Hey, I just wanted to respond to that. I agree. I really respect her point of view, where she was coming from, but I'm a pastoral ministry and business double major, so kind of listen to that. I kind of have some thoughts on how I would approach that, both as a pastor.
I would love to hear that.
As a businessman, knowing that if I had my own business, I was running my own business, I want my employees, you know, or let me go to homosexuality, I believe is a sin. Now, I also believe that stealing is a sin. I believe getting drunk is a sin. I believe that lying is a sin. And so I don't put homosexuality on a whole nother level than all the other sins, just because I don't agree with it. But that being said, I'm also not going to hire someone who's going to come into work drunk. I'm not going to hire someone who's going to steal from me. I'm not going to hire someone who's going to come in high. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you have a perfect right to make all those hiring decisions.
Exactly. And so I don't know that it's discrimination, but, you know, if you do want to make those choices, like you said, your boss has every right to say, no, that's not the appearance that I want for my company. You could go to maybe Hot Topic or something, and maybe they want people who have tattoos and piercings, and they don't want someone who's clean shaven or something like that, because that's not the appearance they want for their company. So I could argue, you know, discrimination for that. But I don't see it as discrimination. I see it as running a business and deciding how you want that business to be run.
Yeah.
And me and my friends have had lots of conversations about, you know, homosexuality and how it bothers us that the church is no longer a safe place for people who believe that. You know, as believers, we're to come alongside anyone who is in their sin, whether it is homosexuality or stealing or drunkenness, you know, and we're to come alongside and to help and to love and to support. So it's a hard balance to find, and unfortunately, you know, you can't say too much if we're going to talk about freedom of religion. Freedom of speech has really kind of disappeared when it comes to talking about. We have freedom of speech as long as we don't talk about homosexuality or a variety of other subjects. So,
yeah. Andrew, thank you very much for that call. And I do want to mention, because one thing Andrew said, you know, it does sort of pierce your heart to think about the church and how we handle the issue of homosexuality. And I have a guest joining me tomorrow named Ann Polk. She was one of the leaders in the ex-gay movement, she and her husband, John. Her husband, John, is now back in the homosexual lifestyle, but she's not. And she's raising her sons, and they're almost grown up now. And I think it will be an interesting interview. I hope you'll join us tomorrow to talk with Ann. She's got a great ministry now. And I think it would be something, she has that same concern that Andrew has for the church and how we handle the sin of homosexuality, which, as he said, is a sin. And we struggle with that and other sins. And so, anyway, I hope you'll join us tomorrow for that. And Andrew, thanks for calling. And I'm going to take a little break here and then continue to take your calls. We've had a pretty good response on this topic here on Point of View. So we will do that in the next segment. We hope you'll stick with us. I'm Penna Dexter, and I'm sitting in for Kirby Anderson. Don't forget to look at the website. You'll see the articles that we've been referring to, and I hope you enjoy them. I also hope you'll make use of that donate button at pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to the final segment of Point of View. I want to remind you about our website, pointofview.net. At the beginning of the program, I played a part of a very compelling video from a young Israeli woman, about 27 years old, talking about her life there. And I want to send you there. I recommend that everyone listen to that video. It's been going around the internet, but if you haven't seen it or heard it, go to pointofview.net and check it out. And then Ted Cruz's article in the Washington Times is there. It's called A Tale of Two Hospitals. And it describes two different hospitals. One, Al-Shifa, which is the largest hospital in Gaza. And guess what? Underneath there is the command center for Hamas, one of them. So, that's pretty scary to me. It's a de facto headquarters for Hamas leaders, and it's a hospital. and we certainly haven't shelled it. But so they're safe under there. Then there's another hospital in Ted Cruz's article in Israel called Ziv. It's a center for pediatric and orthopedic medicine. And during the past 3 years of the civil war in Syria, Ziv has treated more than 1,000 Syrians injured in the conflict that have come there, all free of charge. And so that means resources going away from treating Israeli patients to treating Syrian patients who come there. And first, when they wake up in the hospital, these Syrians have to be reassured that even though they're in Israel, which they might consider enemy territory, that they're going to be cared for well. So this is the contrast between these two points of view, and Ted Cruz summarizes it beautifully. He's such a great communicator. That's at pointofview.net. And as I mentioned, we would greatly appreciate your contributing to the ongoing ministry of Point of View. The donate button is there, and it's a great way to do it. Or you can call us, 800-347-5151. Got a bank full of phones here, so let's try to get through some of these before the end of the program. Let's go to Hank in Georgia. Hi, Hank. Thanks for calling in.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you. Listening to young lady Katie, I love her and God does too. I hope she knows that. But my biggest concern with most homosexuals that I openly meet, that they're very proud of what they are. They want to change my world. Instead of living theirs and making the best of it, they would rather change my world. I'm not up to change. I know what I believe. I know what I've been told. I can't do that. I just choose not to do that. Like I said, I love them. I'm not going to sit around and throw rocks or anything like that. I mean, they're people. They're God's people. But I know one thing as far as rights go. There's a lot of talk about rights in y'all's conversation there just a minute ago. But she does have the right to start her own business and run it as she sees fit, right. Hopefully in a Christian attitude and within the law and with a Christian attitude. And let her do that. Let her give the general public and see what they're doing. And my father, rest his soul, loved him more than most boys love their daddy. He did not like black people whatsoever. Born in the North Georgia hills, he was raised that way. When he owned his own business, finally, he found out that people are green. That's all he saw was green. He didn't see black or Hispanic or white anymore. He saw the color of the money they were spending at his business. And that helped him turn his whole attitude toward toward themselves around. But Katie, like I said, you're going to try to change a world that's not up to change right now. There's too many other important issues for someone like her or others to make people think that that it's a religion or it's a race or it's a perversion. It's all it can be. That's all it possibly can be, just like pornography or any other thing that you may pervert, like drinking, which I've done, and a few other things. I'm a sinner.
Right. Thank you, Hank, so much. It's a really good point, and she wants to change our world, and unfortunately, there are people in power that are trying to change our world to accommodate this agenda. But I appreciated the way she expressed it, but there were a couple of misconceptions, and one is that is a characteristic that we're born with. I know there's tendencies that sometimes people fight and can't fight, but it's not the way God created you. And certainly, when it comes to the transgendered person, that is not. That's not God's creation of you being in the wrong body. He didn't make a mistake. Let's go to Christy in Georgia on GNN. Hi, Christy. Thanks for calling.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
You just kind of actually hit on what I was about to say. I was delivered from homosexuality. God knew that he did not create me that way, and he put the conviction in my heart to let me know that was not the right lifestyle and that he did not put that in me. And, he delivered me from that and he set me free. And I just, I have more of a comment, I think. I don't understand how people can serve a holy, righteous, perfect God and say that he made a mistake by creating someone in the wrong body. My God didn't make a mistake. I gave in to temptation, and the more I gave in to the temptation, it became more and more bondage for me. And then it became real because I gave into it. It wasn't anything that God did. God did not create me that way. And I just want to encourage anyone that considers themselves a homosexual Christian to seek God and really find out what He had planned when He created you. Seek Him and find that, because it's not to be a homosexual, as hard as it is to accept that when you've been in that lifestyle for so long. It's hard to accept that God did not create you that way, but it's the truth. He did not create us as homosexuals. Nobody. No one was created that way. And I just really want to encourage Christians or any homosexual that may be listening, take it from someone that God revealed to. Just go and seek Him. Seek Him with all of your heart to know if you're living right, because one day there will be judgment. And that will be based on how we lived, and if we lived our life for Jesus Christ, and we lived the way that He wanted us to live, not the way that we, our sinful selves, desire to live.
Christy, thank you for your call. And really, the forgiveness is, and the ability to stand before God someday will not be because of how we lived. It will be because of our relationship with Jesus Christ. And Christ died for Christy's sin. He died for my sin. And I think tomorrow you will hear another story, another tale of a life changed of a young woman who was trapped in homosexuality. And if you are, and it's amazing the calls we're getting, ladies and gentlemen, of people who are former or current homosexuals. If you do struggle with that lifestyle, if that is your inclination, we hope you'll listen tomorrow. I think you will enjoy hearing from Ann Polk, whatever sort of a mindset you're coming from with regard to that. But if you say that you're a Christian and you're also battling homosexuality, or if you're giving into it, please listen tomorrow. We'll be on at 1, and I think she's on in the second hour, 1 Central, 2 Eastern. She'll be on in the second hour joining me, and I think it'll be an interesting show for you. Let me take one more call here before we end the program. Let's go to Aaron, in Georgia. Aaron, a very quick comment.
Yeah, hi. I was calling in. I was hearing the show. I'm a Catholic. I was sort of hearing the show, and basically, in a perfect world, you'd want to, hope that people would judge people by their work ethic as opposed to their, homosexuality, race, gender. But we don't live in a perfect world, and also one of the callers mentioned the state that we don't have freedom of speech anymore, and I sort of disagree with that in the sense that we do have freedom of speech. The thing is, doesn't mean that you're not going to have consequences for whatever you say. So, again, does it make it right that we discriminate against homosexuals? I don't think that's right. I think that, they want to work in a place, and so be it. But, they do have that right.
Okay.
So let's make it right that. Yeah.
Aaron, thank you. Thanks for calling in. Well, I wish we could talk a little bit longer, but we're about at the end of the program. And before we go, I don't want to go off the topic too quickly that, we acknowledge here at Point of View, those of us who are believers in Jesus Christ, that we all struggle with sin, and that the death of Jesus on the cross was for our sin. It paid the full price. And so whatever you are struggling with, He's saying, come to me and accept that forgiveness for yourself. I have done that in my life, and I hope that you will do that too. I pray that. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have a nice evening. Andrew, thank you so much for all your work. Catherine, thank you so much for all of your work. And Chris, we appreciate all of it, and we'll see you tomorrow. God bless you.
You have been listening to Point of View. For materials offered on the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.